next Sunday.
Monaghan, now everybody knows the name, those great days when he was winning boxing matches here, there and everywhere, and there were great nights in, I suppose, the King's Hall and the Ulster Hall. But where was he born?
Walter Rinty Monaghan, or to give him his proper name, Sean Joseph Monaghan, was born in Belfast in 1919. And he lived most of his life in a small house in Little Corporation Street near Sailor Town. Some people say he was born in Lancaster Street, but most people would agree that it was Little Corporation Street that he was born in. And of course, one could not speak about anyone buried in the city cemetery without mentioning him. Actually, Sailor Town no longer exists as regards residents, being virtually swept away by the new motorway system some years ago. People often wonder, Walter, where the name Rinty came from. Well, it seems that his granny gave it to him, calling him after Rin Tin Tin, the popular dog. When Sean was young, he was a very good runner, and so was Rin Tin Tin, so you can see where the name Rinty came from. Now, Rinty, coming from Sailor Town, that area had a great tradition for boxing. There were hard characters, there were tough characters, there were streetwise people in the area with all this hustle, this bustle and the docks. And very soon the shrewd men realised that here was a little fellow who could handle himself. He could handle himself very early in life, because it is evident from this when you think that he was fighting in the Chapel Fields round about the year 1935. Chapel Fields was run by a lady called Mrs. Copley, or Copley as the local inhabitants would say. It was a unique place. Often boxers were matched at unequal weights. There were only 2 sets of gloves for the whole evening's proceedings. You got perhaps 10 shillings for a win, or sometimes only 5 shillings, or indeed 2 and 6pence. But of course, when we think of it, those amounts of money were quite big in those days. And we're talking here about the hungry 30s. And it was a handy supplement for a man's income. So that was the type of boxing atmosphere that young Rinty grew up in. There was a tough, rough type of atmosphere in which he had to handle himself very, very much.
And people knew how to enjoy themselves. There were a lot of pubs in the area, so I suppose maybe on a Saturday night the odd fight would break out. So if you could handle yourself, you had an advantage.
Oh, very, very much so. When Sonny Liston came here in 1962, he made for the docks and a pub in the docks, because he had so many people that he knew from his old boxing days in America, and so many of the people had travelled over to America who were ex-boxers from that area, and he was really at home, and Sonny was at home nowhere else. He was a most sullen, withdrawn type of man. Anyway, as a young man, Rinty worked in the shipyard. The story is told that at one period, a big, heavy man, a stager, started to bully him. One day, Rinty hit him with a boxer's punch, floored him and ran home, because he knew the stager had friends who might be lying in wait to get revenge. So there was the Rin Tin Tin. His reputation as a Rin Tin Tinner was certainly very, very much in evident. Now, Monaghan was always very, very fit. He trained nearly every night of the week in a gym in a street called Harding Street in the North Queen Street area of Belfast. These were gruelling sessions. He ran on the roads, he punch-balled, he skipped, and he sparred. The place was run by 2 brothers, Frank and James McAloran, and I think one of them, Frank, later became Rinty's manager. Rinty dieted on goat's milk and raw eggs. He obviously wasn't worried about salmonella, and I see even in these days goat's milk has become a kind of a delicacy now with people, but Rinty was using it all those many years ago. Incidentally, Harding Street has been redeveloped too. That was a street that was famous throughout Ireland in the past for its Christian Brothers Technical School. This was a school that went away back to the beginning of the century, and many famous teachers and scholars, and Marconi was even associated with it. Anyhow, Rinty was a small man, but he had a powerful pair of shoulders. He boxed at flyweight. Now, the limit of that was 8 stone. He was very, very tough. He was a great puncher. Really, he was an all-round battler who never knew when he was beaten, unleashing flurries of blows against opponents and thus battering them into submission. I was just thinking there as we were talking about that gym in Harding Street with perhaps the sawdust on the floor, and comparing it if Rinty had gone into, say, Barney Eastwood's gym in Castle Street when Barry McGuigan was preparing for his fights, and seeing the awful world of a difference that there would have been between his days and more modern times. Anyway, his career developed steadily, and he began taking bouts cross-channel in England and Scotland, and especially in Glasgow.
Was there a big connection between Belfast and Glasgow in the sport, do you think?
Very much so, because you can remember this was the era of the Warnock brothers. It was the era of Benny Lynch, people like that. There was always a great deal of community rivalry between Belfast and Glasgow. Somehow or other, it was a uniting factor in Belfast. Boxing was always a uniting factor in Belfast, in the sense that the fellows from up the Shankill would have supported a man from Sailorstown against a man from Glasgow, even though the fellow he was fighting from Glasgow would have been perhaps a Glasgow Rangers man, if you know what I mean, in that connection. So there was a ready connection. Both towns, if you like, were seaports, and this again encouraged the whole idea of boxing as well, and toughness and street wisdom. Anyway, during the Second World War, he was in the Merchant Navy. Indeed, many men from his area joined this service, but he was shipwrecked there. And during his life, too, he worked at a number of jobs, such as ambulance driving. Now, in 1945, he resumed his career in earnest, and after winning many fights against rated boxers, including several Irish opponents, he climbed the ratings. And in 1946, he came in against Jackie Patterson and beat him in a non-title bout, stopping him inside the distance. Now, previously, in 1938, Patterson had beaten him, so it was all square, if you like, or 1-1. Then in 1947, in October, he fought for the WBA version of the flyweight world title against a very tough little Filipino called Dado Marino. According to the experts, this was a dull fight, but from my recollection, I don't remember it, from my recollection of people speaking about it a few years later, it was held at Harry and Gay Arena. Sadly now no longer with us. There's a big shopping mall there. Again, it was the second time they had met, as previously Rinty had been disqualified in Glasgow against the same opponent. And so we come, Walter, to the 23rd of March 1948. I remember this evening as a very, very young boy, and all my people all going up to watch the fight. It was at the King's Hall, and he was matched against Patterson, and this time it was for the overall world title. You can imagine it. 10,000 screaming fans. Truly a never-forgotten night. Rinty won in 7 rounds. Poor Patterson was a lovely boxer, but he had a weight problem. He had sapped his energy getting down to make the weight. And in those days you had to weigh in at lunchtime, and then you could fill yourself after lunchtime, but he had weakened himself considerably. Rinty won in 7 rounds, as I've said, and he did something which I have never really heard much of before or since. He then went and sang a song from the edge of the ring after the bout. The crowd loved this. And now Rinty was not only world champion, he was the British title holder and the British Empire title holder as well. You're not allowed to have all those titles at once now. Sailorstown, of course, went wild. There was bonfires everywhere, chants of "We Want Rinty." But somehow or other, Rinty's health broke, because in the next 2 years he only fought a few times more. He had chest problems. He won the European title from Maurice Sarayan from France. He putting his world title up, Sarayan putting up his European title. I remember that evening, and we had an old dry battery wireless set with an accumulator. And my mother as I was listening to the fight, sent me out a message, and I was really mad with her. And I rushed out and hoping to get back, you see, in time to hear the rest of the fight. But I missed something that would have even made my heart pump worse, because he was knocked down in the third round. But like the battler that he was, he got up and he stopped Sir Ryan. But of course, when I got back, I was overjoyed because he had won the fight. So, as I've said, he only had a few more fights after he won the title, but he retired in 1950. He retired after a draw with a fellow called Terry Allen. Now, Terry Allen was a London barrow boy. He was from the East End of London, really a Cockney kid. And so Monaghan, by getting a draw, was able to claim that he was undefeated right from the time he won the title until the time he finished. As I say, he finished with chest problems.
But he certainly had that ability to get a crowd to support him, didn't he? He fired the crowd with enthusiasm.
Very, very much so. Very, very much so. I mean, well, here you are, Walter. He's a man, you see, he never appeared to be down. Even in defeat, he could cope with adversity very, very well. I mean, he had around 100 fights, but only lost 8 of them. And they were very, very, very proud of him. He was a real character, a people's champion. I mean, imagine a chap fighting 15 rounds, because it was 15 rounds in those days, instead of the 12 now for championship bouts. And he still has the puff and the strength to go to the edge of the ring and sing a song for them, you see. Drape himself over the ring, be a real ring character, you know. And of course, in those days, the beauty about Monaghan's title in those days was too that there were only 8 championship weights. It was a largely unified structure. There were weights like fly, bantam, feather, lightweight, welterweight, cruiserweight and heavyweight. But nowadays, you have about 56 world champions, because there are about 5 different organisations running the sport, and there are intermediate weights as well.
You met him personally, did you?
I did indeed, Walter. I met him a few times, and I was struck by the charm of the man. He was a very carefree spirit. By this time, of course, he had lost all his money. And he told me, and again, he printed this in the national papers, because when he was very much at the top. He earned a lot of money, but the money was spent in some way. And when I met him, again in his little house down in Little Corporation Street, he told me he was so proud of the dock area, he would never leave that house, no matter how much money he had got, no matter even if he had been a millionaire. He told me, rather in a humorous sort of way, again, he was always very humorous, you know, he was a devil may care type of fellow. He told me that when he won his big fights, and when he went round the next day to cash the cheque that he received, that there were sometimes a score, maybe 40, 50, 60 people all waiting at the bank for him. You know, the sort of people like glad handlers, they come and how you're Rinty and so forth. And he would have given them 5s and 10s out of his cheque, you see. And they would have told him how they had supported and helped his family in the old days. And he was a sort of a sucker, he maintained, for a soft story. Then, of course, when you meet people, the thing about Monaghan today is, you see, that there are lots of people who knew him and are still alive, and they tell you, oh, some of that was only a story. He gave money away, but he didn't give it all away, you know. But he's a most entertaining man.
Did his health then deteriorate quite sharply?
It did. He actually developed bronchial problems, but it didn't prevent him, Walter, from becoming something of an entertainer. Bob Mee, in his book Heroes and Champs, where he traces the history of 250 famous boxers of the past, said he was an entertainer by heart and a boxer by choice. He always had a song. He sang as well as Irish Eyes Are Smiling, Broken-Hearted Clown. He became quite successful as a member of a group called the Three Hillbillies. And he had a brilliant one-man show, Popeye the Sailor Man. Indeed, he recorded When Irish Eyes Are Smiling just a few months before his death. That was around Christmas 1983. So he was a witty man. He did a lot of clowning about. He was a man to brighten up a party. There was always a quip from him all the time. And as I say, he was inclined to laugh off both his own faults and laugh off the faults of others. He was a very, very tolerant man. He was very good company. He told me, incidentally, in those times I met him, that his favourite singer was Al Jolson, and his favourite song was Sweet 16. And so, sadly, we come to his funeral. That was held on the 6th of March, 84, in St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Donegal Street. The church was packed. I remember being there. Old sporting adversaries and lots of ordinary people, former fans, hundreds were there. Indeed, the whole traffic was brought to a standstill outside. I remember well the priest, Father Michael Murray, and a beautiful oration for him. He said, I remember even writing it down at the time, it was so remarkable. He said, Rinty was a man who brought good news. He was a gentleman, a person who was loved by all. And this is what life is all about. It's about touching people, making friends, bringing happiness. So I think really, Walter, he was a great sportsman. Indeed, he was a unique sportsman who brought a lot of light to many people in Belfast and throughout Ireland. And those sort of grim, ration-led years after the war. And he had fans, as I said before, up the Shankill and down the Falls, as well as in his beloved Sailor Town. And he unified the people, so much so that I sometimes feel he never really has died at all.
Still fondly remembered by all who supported him in those years.
Very, very fondly remembered. His faults, if you like, were actually taken away by the beautiful, beautiful crystal clear memories of all the joy and pleasure that he gave everyone.
Now, I believe you have a poem written about him.
I have, Walter. This is actually written by a man called Joe Mulhern, and I was very privileged to get it some time ago. It's simply called Rinty Monaghan. Come all ye gallant Irishmen and listen to my song. It's all about a fighting lad, I won't detain you long. His name is Rinty Monaghan and he came from Sailor Town, and way back in 1948 he took the flyweight crown. I watched them fight with left and right, each man as hard as steel. I saw them fight for coppers down in the chapel fields. There was fighting Johnny Basham and bomber Billy Brown, but most of all, I do recall the lad from Sailor Town. Was down in the Bosco Club that he learned the fighting game, to hold his fists up like a man and never be afraid. Then came the night we had waited for, and down in the Ulster Hall, for he defeated Bunty Doran, the toughest of them all. He then set out for London town, his fortune to seek there. He challenged England's champions to fight him if they dare. The gambling men all laughed and laughed, they laid him 4-1. But there were not so many laughing when the fighting it was done. Then he challenged Maurice Sarayan to fight him for his crown. He caught young Rinty in the third and laid him on the ground. The blood was flowing from his eye and dripping from his nose. The referee had counted 9 before young Rinty rose. He danced away from danger, then came punches strong and fast. Soon we were all wondering how Sarayan could last. Then Rinty threw a mighty blow like a shot fired from a gun, and the Irish they were cheering, for the battle had been won. And when Irish eyes are smiling was the song that Rinty sung. He retired undefeated and never lost the crown. We will all remember Rinty Monaghan, the lad from Sailor Town.
Jim O'Kane, and here's a short reminder of one of those glorious moments from the life of Rinty Monaghan, with commentator Raymond Glendinning doing his best to keep up with the action.
Monaghan goes straight in, left and right to face, left and right to face. Madison's reading, he's still his feet, he's getting left and right to turn again, and another left and right, another left and right, and now goes Madison. I think he's out this time. A battery, doesn't know where he is. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Madison is out!
Raymond Glendinning, commentator at the World Championship fight when Rinty Monaghan defeated Patterson in the King's Hall. Rinty was equally famous for breaking into song, and it wasn't only when Irish eyes are smiling. He often sang Sweet 16, which Jim O'Kane referred to, and he often acknowledged that Al Jolson was the singer who was one of his influences.
Folks, tonight I've got a song that really comes from a man's heart. The man who wrote this song was a comedian. That is, he told jokes for a living. His name was Jim Thornton. And he wrote the song for his wife, Bonnie Thornton. It must have been at least 40 years ago. Jim's song wasn't on the hit parade then, but it is now. And what a thrill Jim Thornton would get if he knew that the whole world was singing his song. When first I saw the love light in your eyes, I dreamed the world had naught but joy for me. And even though we've drifted far apart, I never dreamed but what I dreamed of you. I love you as I never loved before. Since first I met you on the village green, come to me, and my dream of love is all. I love you as I love you when you are sweet, when you were sweet, 16. When you were sweet, when you were sweet, 16.
Sweet 16, sung by Al Jolson and predating Foster and Allen by many, many years. Now, if you're interested in tackling the Ulster Way, that creation of the late Wilfred Capper...